What's up guys, Kenan from Kenan KTV here, and welcome back to another video. In this video, I want to do the ultimate Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson breakdown video. In this video, I will go over this fight and I will give you guys the tail of the tape, my personal fighter cards that I have made, a full breakdown of the fight, and then at the end, my own personal pick, who I will be thinking is going to win come fight night. So with that being said, let's jump right into the video. Let's start off with the tail of the tape. The challenger, Tony Ferguson, stands in at 5 foot 11 inches tall, has a 76-inch reach. Ferguson has a professional MMA record of 23 wins with 3 losses and no draws. Ferguson is currently on an 11-5 win streak, one of the highest in the current UFC roster. However, his opponent, the reigning and defending UFC lightweight champion Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov, stands in at 5 foot 10 inches tall, has a 70-inch reach, and has a perfect professional MMA record of 27 wins with no losses and no draws. This is a fight that the UFC has tried to make numerous times. Hopefully this time around it will go through in 2019. For Khabib Nurmagomedov, there is not really much left for him to do in the lightweight division. The only guy that is left for him to face is Tony Ferguson, and that is also one of the biggest fights in the lightweight history. The winner of this fight could arguably become the greatest lightweight fighter that the UFC has ever seen. So personally, I hope this fight happens this time around, at least this year. Now let's go over to my personal fighter cards. With El Cucuy. Tony Ferguson has an overall rating of 91. Fighting out of the 10th Planet Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu team, Ferguson has 93 striking, 92 grappling, 96 stamina, 88 chin, 89 defense, and a 90 physicality attribute. Obviously, his most standout point is the stamina. Standing at a whopping 96 overall, he has probably one of the best cardio and endurance in the entire UFC roster. Pair that up with great striking and grappling, Tony Ferguson is a nightmare for anybody who is going to be fighting him. An equal of a nightmare is his opponent. Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov has an overall rating of 92. Fighting out of the American Kickboxing Academy, Khabib has 87 striking, 97 grappling, 93 stamina, 92 chin, 87 defense, and a 95 physicality attribute rating. His standout attributes are obviously his grappling and also his physicality. When you have the grappling dominance that Khabib has, add on top the physicality, when you get taken down by Khabib, it will be a very rough night for you. But not to undermine his striking, Khabib is a very smart guy. Even though he hasn't the best striking in the entire UFC roster, he knows how to mix it up and make his striking work into his grappling department. So in the end, we are looking at the most elite lightweights in the world right now, and on paper, it promises to be one of the better fights this division has ever seen. But for now, let's proceed to the next segment, the actual breakdown. I am sure that most of you guys have already seen the part 1 and 2 of how each fighter can beat one another. I made a video where I talked about how Tony Ferguson could beat Khabib, and another video where I went over how Khabib could beat Tony Ferguson. But now it's time to mix all of the points that I made in those videos together and see how the fight will actually be playing out. If this fight happened when it was first scheduled to be happening, I believe the fight would have looked a lot differently. In my opinion, Khabib has improved a lot on his striking game. He has become a lot more confident and he has become a lot more efficient with whatever he's trying to do. Confidence and efficiency is how I would describe Khabib Nurmagomedov's striking. He isn't flashy, he doesn't do anything that Tony Ferguson does when it comes to the ankle picking from mid-cage or the spinning elbow to another spinning elbow to whatever else Tony Ferguson does. What you see is what you get with Khabib. Very simple, straightforward. If Khabib is not coming forward, he's being very defensive and he doesn't really engage. He doesn't fight off the back foot that well, Khabib. But if he doesn't fight off the back foot at all, he's not really giving a counterpuncher the window to counterpunch. That is the same way he beat Conor McGregor in the center department. Even though the fight started off and Khabib didn't basically throw anything, because he was backing up the entirety of that round, he essentially gave Conor McGregor not a single opening for him to counter with. Because he didn't engage and because he didn't come forward, Conor McGregor was the guy that had to come forward and initiate the first attack. That left Conor McGregor overextended and he was overreaching, so he ended up missing and whiffing most of his shots. And in those moments, Khabib shot in for his takedowns and got it done. So the point that I'm trying to make is that he actually improved enough to a point where he's actually a threat in the striking game to Tony Ferguson also. One thing that I can say that Khabib has is power and speed. He doesn't have the best technique, I can give you guys that. But because of the reach that he has, he can essentially swing his arms a lot quicker, right? If you have a fighter that has a very long reach, more often than not, they're kind of slow. And that is what I see with Tony Ferguson. His game doesn't really rely on being a fast fighter. He relies on being very awkward and unorthodox. So he doesn't really need to be the guy that can string 5-punch combinations in 2 seconds. He doesn't need that. What he does need is space. Enough space for him to do all of that. If he doesn't have the room to, for example, go in and enter with an elbow, you're really limiting what Tony Ferguson can do in there. Tony is the type of guy that doesn't really rely on his jab that much. He's the type of fighter that can just burst into action immediately. He has a good sense of distance and he doesn't really depend on his jab too much. Whereas, for example, Kevin Lee is very heavy on his jab. He likes to step in with his jab and step out with that jab. One thing that Tony Ferguson doesn't do is exactly that. He doesn't really set up his punches. Because of that, he's kind of telegraphing most of the time. But then again, because he's awkward, he can get away with it because his opponents do not know what is going to be coming. That is exactly what makes this guy very dangerous. Against Khabib, he has always fought guys that are somewhat orthodox. You can kind of tell what they're going to do. Okay, against Edson Barboza, what is Edson going to do? Edson will try to keep that distance, work off of his jab here and there, but mainly set up his kicks. What does Conor McGregor try to do? Conor McGregor is going to try to let you come in and fall into his traps so he can counter you. What did Khabib do? He didn't do that. He didn't come forward. Against Iaquinta came out very low, defending takedowns immediately. What did Khabib do? He popped a jab. But against Tony Ferguson, you cannot know what that man is going to be doing. It is essentially guesswork. And that is something that I believe will make Khabib desperate. That will make Khabib anxious, and I believe that is something that Khabib will not even try to risk. He will immediately come forward. He will immediately try to close in the distance. That is what I believe Khabib will do. Then the factor or the attribute in Tony Ferguson's game comes into play, the elbows. What can he do in the close range in the stand-up department? Will Tony Ferguson land his elbows? Will he try to go for his knees? What will Tony do? One thing that I can definitely bet on and know for sure is that Tony Ferguson, he doesn't have enough punching power to make Khabib respect him. I believe that will help Khabib in coming forward. I don't believe Tony Ferguson can use his jab or a right hand and make Khabib feel his power so that Khabib will finally back off and leave him alone. I don't believe he can do that. I believe that is an attribute that Conor McGregor has, because that is why Khabib was backing up. He didn't want to engage and he didn't want to enter a trap and get knocked out. I don't believe that is the case against Tony Ferguson. I don't believe Tony Ferguson is as twitchy and as reactive as Conor is, but that is something that is going to be playing in his favor. That is also one of the reasons why Conor McGregor doesn't really look the same later down in the fight. The longer the fight goes on, the more that Conor McGregor can be less reliant on his fast twitch muscle fibers. The more energy that he loses, the more power, speed, and timing Conor McGregor essentially gives away. That is why Conor McGregor is very dangerous early on. But in the case for Tony Ferguson, he isn't the type of fighter that Conor is. He doesn't really rely on fast twitch muscles like that. And his body isn't really structured like that to begin with. He's a guy that has a lot of slow twitch muscle fibers, and he can go and fight at a very steady pace for 5 rounds straight. For example, against Kevin Lee had success early on because he was really essentially outworking Tony Ferguson in a sense, but it was very clear that Tony Ferguson will out-survive that little tornado, that little hurdle, and it was very apparent that Kevin Lee was going to be depleting himself, and the longer the fight went on, the more powerful Tony Ferguson would get and get a finish over Kevin Lee, as he did. And that is what makes this fight interesting, because we don't really know where Khabib is. I believe that Khabib is a bit more to the fast twitch muscle side, and if the fight goes on for an extended amount of period, and the fight plays out at a pace that is kind of monotone but is still a pretty high output, I believe the fight will play more and more in Tony Ferguson's favor. But early on, it is going to be very hard for Tony Ferguson to keep Khabib off of him and make Khabib respect him in the first couple of rounds. So for Khabib to go in there and get Tony Ferguson against the cage and get a takedown like that, I don't believe that is very hard for him to do in this matchup, and I believe he will get it done. Now the question becomes, what will Tony Ferguson do off of his back? The last time Khabib has faced somebody that is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was Rafael dos Anjos, and that fight was back in 2014 if I am not mistaken. So a lot of time has passed, but Tony Ferguson is very different from Rafael dos Anjos. He isn't as lanky, and he isn't as elusive and creative as Tony Ferguson is. Tony is not afraid to fight off of his back. He is not afraid to throw the elbows off of his back. He is not afraid to fight back from his back. Add on top that he has great stamina, the chances of him getting a submission will be increasing with each round. The more that Khabib slows down, the better, and the higher the chances of Tony Ferguson getting a submission finish are going to be more likely. I believe the fight will definitely make it out of the first round, and we will have to see a second round. How will the second round play out? In the second round, I would have to assume that Khabib's chances in the striking game are going to be a lot higher. Now, the difference in Khabib's striking and Tony Ferguson's striking is that Khabib is obviously a bit faster and has enough power to drop anybody. Now, granted that Tony Ferguson has gotten dropped by Anthony Pettis and Kevin Lee, and basically he isn't new to getting dropped, he isn't new to getting hurt in there. So I believe the chances of Khabib going in there and rocking Tony Ferguson aren't that crazy. I don't believe Tony Ferguson is quick enough to counter Khabib's weird and explosive attacks, but it is only a matter of time before Tony Ferguson can figure out Khabib's linear striking approach. Khabib tends to stick behind a jab and throw an overhand right here and there, and maybe going for a flying knee. After a while, that may get repetitive, and that is the point where Tony Ferguson will get stronger. The longer the fight goes on, the more data and the more intel that Tony Ferguson can collect and use against Khabib. And the longer the fight goes on, the slower Khabib will get. I don't believe in this fight he will be fighting somebody that is going to get drained and beaten to a pulp, because when the fight does end up going to the ground, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that Tony Ferguson has will be enough to make Khabib respect him for a couple of moments. I don't believe Khabib will go in there and try to immediately choke out Tony Ferguson. I believe he will use the time that he has to win octagon control time and proceed to the next round. So in the end, I feel like this fight is a fight where who can outlast the other fighter and who can outsmart the other fighter. But this is my breakdown on the fight. Let's proceed to who I will be picking come fight night. I believe the winner will be, and still, the lightweight UFC champion Khabib, the Eagle Nurmagomedov. I think the time has come that Khabib has improved too much for Tony Ferguson at this point. I have to believe that Tony Ferguson is nearing the end of his career. He's 34, 35 years old. He has been dropped a lot of times, so I believe this fight against Khabib is going to be one of the last big fights that he can participate in and actually perform well in. I definitely see Tony Ferguson having great success in spots where he can hit Khabib enough to a point where he can have a great highlight reel, but nothing to a point that will have any significance and put Khabib's undefeated record in jeopardy. I don't feel like Tony Ferguson has enough physical power to stop Khabib in his tracks of coming forward. So in the striking department, in the stand-up game, I don't believe he will have a lot of success. And by the time the fight ends up on the bottom, on the floor, I don't see Tony Ferguson really submitting Khabib like that. Obviously, he has great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's very tall and lanky, has good stamina. He can definitely create openings, and a submission win isn't unlikely for him. But the control that Khabib puts on his opponents, the way that he controls the wrists, the legs, I find it very hard for him to actually make a mistake that Tony can capitalize on and submit Khabib with. So in the end, I believe this will be a kind of a boring fight in a way, where we will have some great spots of action, but then it will get quickly countered and Khabib will get back to his dominating ways. So in the end, this is my prediction. Only time will tell who will come out victorious. But for now, this is the ultimate Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson breakdown video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave what you guys think of the fight in the comment section down below. Who do you guys believe will win? But with that being said, I am Kenan from KENAN TV, signing off. Later. They couldn't give a fuck about me.